Well, welcome aboard, everybody. My name is Craig Vaughn. I'm the Chief Financial Officer and founder of Castle Management. I want to welcome back Jeff and Michael from KBR and a special guest, Stephen Gladstone from Gladstone and Associates CPA. There we are. Guys, it's been a while for me, for you and I anyway. But Michael, everybody knows you, but will you give us a few words on the firm and yourself?
I'd love to. Craig, it's good to have you back. Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
Jeff, always good to see you. Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Bender, Jeff Rembaum with K. Bender Rembaum. We are, I hope you know, a community association law firm with 20 attorneys. 10 of us have are certified board specialists, 9 in condominium and plan unit development, and 1 construction law. Offices in Palm Beach County, Hillsborough County, Broward County, and in Miami-Dade by appointment. Full service, soup to nuts, handling everything all of our clients need to assist you with your legal needs. We will offer free consultations to boards if you're interested in needing further guidance on what we're going to talk about today or any legal matters. Info at kbrlegal.com. We're very active in legislation. We're very active in publications. We're very active in education. So all those good things. So I think everybody knows. I know, Jeff, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, you missed one thing only that I recently found out. I am now, well, it's happened a few years over the years, but I'm in the Florida Trends Legal Elite, which I consider quite an honor. Only very few select attorneys get into that status, which is kind of cool for real estate. So I was very excited about that. Don't know.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations. Is that a KBR publication or is that actually somebody else writes that?
That's Florida Trend. I appreciate that, Greg. That's Florida Trend Magazine.
I'm kidding. Congratulations. And
so.
Well respected, Jeff. And we appreciate that. Steve, first time attendee. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the firm.
Well, thanks for having me. Gladstone and Company. We are a full service accounting firm located in Broward County. And I have been a Florida CPA since 1981. The firm focuses mainly on common interest realty associations, condominium, co-ops, homeowner associations. We perform audits, reviews, compilations in accordance with the requirements of Florida statutes for the associations, as well as the year-end tax return. We are members of the Florida Institute of CPAs and the American Institute of CPAs. Our firm actively participates in the Common Interest Realty Association Committee of the Florida Institute of CPAs, meaning that we plan and present an annual 2-day conference to other CPAs, teaching them all aspects of accounting and auditing related to condominiums, homeowner associations, etc. We're a member of the AICPA peer review program, which is now mandatory. We've been in it voluntarily for about 15 years, and we have always received the highest available passing grade from that institution.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. And welcome aboard. And we're going to talk about budgets today. So we'll be picking your brain when we get there. I want to remind everybody that's listening that our panelists are not here to give an opinion about your particular association or any advice specifically for your association. This is general, their general comments on what we're going to talk today. This is season 3, episode 12 of our leadership series. The topics today, we're going to cover 2 items, SB-4D and a continuing dialogue there, and then we're going to jump into budgets. But before we get there, Marinez, can you put our listeners to work and with the first poll question, which is what community do you live in, just so we get a good idea of who we're listening to today. Fantastic. So we'll get that information, guys. Again, SB-4D, kind of the continuing dialogue. There's continual chatter in our world about SB-4D for sure. We got lots of questions coming in. Jeff, we're gonna post the results of the poll in a second here, and once we do that, I want let's do that. Marinez, will you post the results of the poll, please, so we can see who's in our audience? Wow, a lot of condos, and I think there's a specific reason that condos might be involved most of which we're going to address today. So thank you very much, everybody, again, for listening in. The first topic of the day is SB-4D. And Jeff, before we jump into some of the details, can you remind everybody of the key components of the new legislation again?
Sure, and I'm going to be brief on the reminder. For those that need to see it, Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, but there should be a link on Castle's website and on ours to our prior presentation where we really, last show, maybe a couple shows ago, we dove really deep into the specific requirements. But generally speaking, we have two parts to Senate Bill 4D that affect our buildings, primarily 3 stories and higher, the Milestone Inspection, and then we have the Structural Integrity Reserve Study. Milestone Inspection has 2 parts, phase 1, phase 2. Only if the engineer recommends you're going into phase 2 will you have to do the phase 2 part of it. Short story is, however, 30 years after your certificate of occupancy is issued is the first deadline for the buildings 3 stories and higher to have their milestone inspection, unless you're within 3 miles of the coastline, and then it's going to be 25 years. And in both instances, every 10 years thereafter, you will do a renewal milestone inspection. Now, if your certificate of occupancy was issued before July 1st, 1992, then you're going to have your milestone inspection phase 1 completed by December 31st, 2024. In addition to that, there's we're not really going to go dive deep into the glitches of Senate Bill 4D, but as we keep going through them and are talking to our clients, more and more glitches are appearing, shall we say. One of them is that the phase 1 of the milestone inspection also has to be completed within 180 days of notification from the local enforcement agency. If your local government is giving you a date before the statutory dates, please get in touch with your association attorney to help you with that particular issue. In terms of getting scheduled on the milestone inspections, don't wait. Create the relationships with the engineers, architects, et cetera, that you're going to need to help your association get these reports done. Problem that they're going to have is that the Florida Building Commission still has to submit a report to the legislature of recommendations for the maintenance and the inspection of these types of buildings and what the standards are going to be. And that's not due until December 31st, 2023, if in fact they're timely. Hopefully they will be timely. So the engineers really, practically speaking, may not know the standards of the inspections that they have to conduct until sometime in 2024. Now, that's a really brief overview there. Now let's talk about, can we shift gears, Craig? And we'll
I
talk
wanted to
about
make one comment,
Sure.
Jeff, because I think you made a good point.
Exactly.
We think that your engineer should be a key partner in the management of your community. It's important to establish those relationships now, as you said. But again, we had a lot of questions and like, okay, what are they going to do? Should we engage them now? How much is going to cost? And we don't really have any of that data because they don't even know what they have to do. So I think the concept is get going, meet your engineer, make them a partner of yours. But, for 2023, is not going to be a whole bunch going on in that regard.
Okay. Next is what we refer to in the business as the Sears study, Structural Integrity Reserve Study. These are essentially, at the end of the day, mandatory reserves, not waivable by the members, not available for use for other purposes. You're going to get into issues with, well, gosh, what if we have pooling now and it's saying that we have these new categories of roof, load-bearing walls, floor, foundation, fireproofing, plumbing, electrical systems, waterproofing, windows, any other item with deferred maintenance greater than $10,000. So the question is, how can you use your existing reserves and apply them to this? You're going to have to get with your association's lawyer on the process to do that. Who does it apply to? Condominiums, cooperative buildings, 3 stories or more in height. Really, HOAs, you're off the hook. It's not going to affect you. You're going to be doing these reports every 10 years after the creation of the condominium. How was the condominium created? By the recordation of its declaration of condominium. The first one, however, is due December 31st, 2024. Let's see. As a reminder, shifting gears. So that's just a little taste of the Structural Integrity Reserve Study. There's going to be some significant issues with it. I know that the legislature, as there are some legislatures talking about how to provide some financial relief to associations, creating new programs. And if those gain traction, I'm sure Craig will be in touch, and maybe we'll do a show and we'll talk more in detail about that when it's more relevant. As a reminder, however, to all condos and all cooperatives, you have a deadline this year. And that deadline is January 1st, 2123. I'm sorry, I said this year, and this year is 2022. But you've got to report to the DBPR basic information about your condominium cooperative association, the number of buildings, the number of units, the addresses, the counties where the buildings are located. There is a direct link where you can fill that information out online and submit it directly to the division. Michael and I created a form, and that form is available on the KBR website. We sent a link to that yesterday, and we'll be sending out another link for that later today. So for any association that wants to print out a piece of paper, if you will, so that they can, the manager can then share that information with the board and get permission to submit it to the division. That's one mechanism to do it. The other one, again, is directly on the DBPR website. I would give you the link, but it's incredibly long.
We have it. If we have it, Marinez, can you post the link? We have it, Jeff, just so we can show everybody.
Perfect. Craig, any other questions?
No, I do have some questions. I guess we're going to put the link up. You can also mail it to the DPBR. The link can be found on our website. You as well, Jeff and Michael. For our clients, and probably most who are professionally managed, your management company will take responsibility for submitting the form. You've got to kind of get it to us. If you have any confusion, make sure you run it by your attorney. Jeff, a couple of questions came up, but for my clarification, every condo has to report this information, regardless of whether you're 3 stories, regardless of whether or not you're close to the beach, or the coastline, any of those things. So this is for everybody, and 100%. It's really to allow them to get their world of, who's involved.
Correct.
And then
that's one of the things, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about glitches.
Yeah.
Further, but that's one of the questions that has been posed to the director, the new director at the DBPR is, do you want a bunch of 2-story or 1-stories just sending you these things that say none and flooding your inbox? And because that's right now, it doesn't say limited to 3-story. The questions are all focused on 3 stories, but they should clarify that if you're below 3 stories, you need not worry about this reporting requirement. So we need that clarification. Yeah.
Okay, Jeff, just to summarize, thank you for that. And I think, again, just because of the questions that came in, I noticed there was a little bit of confusion. I just want to go through a couple of quick things. One, to confirm, associations do not need to complete the milestone inspections in 2023.
Correct. They're going to roll in 2024 in the beginning. Yeah.
Okay. And so probably don't need to be budgeted in 2023, I would suggest, guys. It's going to be an operating cost in your 2024 budget. That's when you're going to do it.
Completely agree, but I also think it's worthwhile to have a 5 or 10 minute conversation during planning of this year's budget to discuss, some of the things that will impact the next year's budget as well, just to get it on the radar.
I think that's
great. But also, Craig, Jeff pointed out earlier the issue that you have with municipalities issuing these orders, and if some of these, we've had this come up where a couple of municipalities have issued orders that the milestone inspections need to be done. And they need to be done sooner than 2024. So again, jumping slightly ahead, one of the issues that will hopefully be addressed in Tallahassee is that issue as far as what authority does municipalities, the extension that the municipalities have. So I agree. I think the intent is we shouldn't have to deal with it in 2023. But unfortunately, you have some confusion on that, at least from the local level.
Yeah, right. It's a very good point. And one of the recommendations we're making is we know that someone's going to send you someone's going to send you a notification. The reality is you should know your own dates. So get with your attorney, find out, make sure you have the right TCO date, count back, count forward, whatever you need to do. A good defense of not doing it is we didn't get notice from the county. So I would suggest that you take this into your own hands and make sure you know the dates.
Craig, I don't
that's
think
not a good defense.
Yeah, it's not a defense.
Not
Correct.
a good defense.
Sorry, what I say? So yeah, I said it's not a good
Yeah.
defense, double negative. But
I mean,
yes,
it's a good, quote unquote, good defense up until December 31st, 2024, if you don't get noticed. But after that, you need to know this is supposed to be done by December 31st, 2024. The fact that you're not noticed doesn't mean you don't need to do it.
It's like making your bed. You don't need your mom and dad to tell you to make it. Get it done.
exactly. Just make it exactly right. The last one I just want to make sure we have clarity on, and we're going to talk about this when we get to the budget section, is you can, if you're a condominium, you follow the appropriate, membership vote rules, you can still waive or partially fund reserves in 2023, frankly, and 2024, because that restriction on not waiving them comes in 2025.
After December 31st, 2024 is how they wrote it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
agree on that. But remember, for all of you condos out there, you need to pass the budget with the reserves fully funded. Then you make the decision if you're going to present to the membership the opportunity to waive or reduce.
Yeah.
Since we know what's coming up in 2025, I don't know necessarily that you want to fully waive. It's a business decision everyone will be discussing, but it makes sense to get a head start when we know the reserves are going to be non-waivable at the moment anyway for 2025. Craig, before we move on, could you tell us what is that lapel pin? It looks really nice and I can't quite get a visual. It says
It's my Royal Service pin
Outstanding from Castle.
from Castle. Yes.
Very cool.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Michael, we've teased the glitch bill. We've got everybody on edge. So why don't you take us? It's probably not going to go away. Is that a fair summary of the legislation?
It's not going away. Yeah. So and people want to know what is a glitch bill exactly? Just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page with regard to that terminology. It's not Senate Bill 4D is not alone. It's not unique in being put through Tallahassee, signed by the governor, being put into play, and then as a practical matter, we see, wait a minute, certain things don't fly right. There are certain things don't read correctly in their application, but Senate Bill 4D certainly is one of those that, in my opinion, was put the way it was put through. Unfortunately, did result in some questions, some of which big questions, some of which we've already discussed. And that's what a glitch bill then is where it's not recreating the wheel. It's coming back and saying, okay, how do we fix, how do we tweak, how do we modify what Tallahassee previously approved and had the governor sign, now that we've seen the practical effects of what the language is. So what we're hearing about and some of the things we talked about and what some of the things I'm also hearing that will either might be addressed or in some cases I'm hoping will be addressed. And I also saw some people posing these questions. Well, what is fully funded? And there's several items with regard to the budgets. And there seem to be a lot of questions. And really just to briefly, what happened here is the Senate had a milestone inspection bill. The House had basically a reserve study bill. And really they did a phase 1 inspection. That was their inspection portion. These two things kind of got merged, but they really didn't get cleaned up well enough to so there's a little bit of disconnect between the two. That's why the requirements for the milestone inspection don't even mirror the requirements for the SERS. We need to know with regard to the milestone inspection, a couple of things we talked about. There is language in the bill that talks about the authority of your county, your city, your locale, your municipalities, and what exactly is the extent of that authority. My understanding is the intention was to let the authorities everybody know that the authorities will have the power to enforce compliance by December 31st, 2024, not to be enforcing these things in 2023. So that if people aren't in compliance by 2024, that the counties can step in, the local municipalities can step in and make sure these things are, that you're getting done, or I guess they could cite you like they would any other violation. And so we want to we're hoping that they will clean up the municipal authority and clarify what and that will help with the deadline.
And Mike, before you go on, one thing, because you mentioned it about fully funding, and I just wanted to share.
No, I'm going to get to that. That's on the SERS part. I'm going to get to all that stuff, I promise. Okay, the 40-year certification overlap was the other one. And that applies to the Miami-Dade and Broward counties only, but a lot of questions have come up. Now, I do understand that Miami-Dade, after regular session ended and nothing had come out of regular session, I understand that they have put into play internally to reduce their 40 to 30. And so that's going through the Miami-Dade process. But then, of course, they had the special session, they put in the 30-year. So 30/25, I should say. And so what's for those two counties, whether they can clarify through Tallahassee or whether they're going to refer that back to the counties to clarify whether the 40-year certs that have been done or were in the process of being done will be sufficient. Because quite frankly, my understanding of the 40-year cert is that everything you're required to do in there covers the milestone inspection and then some.
Wow.
But there are procedural requirements for the milestone inspection, like publication and delivery and all those things that weren't part of it. So that seems like a pretty simple thing to address. But I think that that'll have to be decided. What the coastline is, that's a big one. I saw a couple of people ask that now. We would love them to clarify exactly what they mean by this 3 miles from the coastline, hoping that will be addressed. 2-story buildings, what does that mean? And that's another thing that people constantly ask. What if you have an underground garage? What if you have a loft? We need them to clarify, and whether that will be done at the Tallahassee level or whether there'll be authority given to the DBPR to create draft rulemaking, give them rulemaking authority to then clarify as part of like the Florida Administrative Code, which is another document that does offer a lot of information. In fact, it's the only document that references pooled funding. That's not in the statutes at this point. So those are the items for the milestone inspection, at least some of them that are being talked about that hopefully will be addressed. So for all of you listening and writing your questions, do understand that we all have those same questions, and we're hoping that we can get clarification. So we're not ignoring your questions. We just can't give you a better answer than it needs to be clarified. And good thing is you don't have to do anything this year. We're able to wait until March. Session starts in March of next year, that we can hopefully get all this cleaned up by March, April, May of next year. On the funding side, on the SERS side, there's a few items. So the simplest one is the components. The SERS components includes foundations, and so they need clarification. That everyone's been talking about how do you figure out the life expectancy of the foundation? How do you determine the funding for that? The other item that came up a lot is the windows, because the association is supposed to be reserving for components that it's responsible for. And obviously, many communities' documents make the owners responsible for windows. So those are two items from the list of structural integrity reserves that need to be better clarified. Then will those items within the SERS, those list of items that Jeff read earlier that are in the SERS, can they be pooled? With it, and so we'll call these the structural integrity items. Can they be pooled within themselves? And of course, under the statute, they would not be able to then they can't be waived or less than fully funded. But can they be pooled so that if you need to do electrical work and you have funds in there that were for painting, but they've all been pooled now, you can use them. So we want clarification on pooled. And I just had Craig, I was telling you, I was on Saturday, we were with the Florida delegates. We were kind of having our in-person meeting, 3 hours, talking about a lot of things. And a lot of this was this stuff. And there was a fairly large consensus that yes, pooling can be done. But then there was a few people, myself included, who said, guys, I don't disagree that it should be able to be done, but it's a very simple fix. Just clarify in the statute. That's what we're asking for from Tallahassee, is clarify. Don't leave it subject to interpretation where different lawyers can maybe interpret it different ways. Different engineers, different accountants can interpret these things different ways. Just clean it up. So we're talking about that. And then the item that and Jeff may want to add more is the fully funded question, because that's the big one, is what does fully funded mean, guys? And I think that may be something that will be, they are likely to defer that, in my opinion, I could be wrong, to the division, because as I said, the Florida Administrative Code is where they spell out what pooled reserves is and the application of pooling of reserves. But I believe there's no question. The number one question that seems everyone is concerned about on the Sears side is fully funded. What does that mean? Do we need to have all this money in place now? Or does that just mean, we have, if it's a 10-year window, we can do this over 10 years. So they really do need to clean up, for everybody's sake, fully funded. Jeff, do you want to add more to that?
I do. Everybody, you need to check with your association's attorney, make sure they agree with what I'm about to say. But I think in looking at all the national data on the term, it's pretty clear to me that fully funded means your obligation for this year. So if the component is a $100,000 component, that means we need $10,000 a year. Fully funded means we are fully funded the amount we need this year, i.e. $10,000. Not everybody may agree, but until I hear something that's going to change my mind on that, that's pretty much where I am on the definition of fully funded. But again, you have to get with your association's lawyer, management team. Steve Gladstone is going to have some input on that, as the CPA probably. So lots to think about and work with here.
Well, and thanks, Jeff. And I will say that's exactly the reason why it needs to be clarified, because what Jeff just expressed to me is 100% logical. And quite frankly, it's the way that reserves have been funded all along. No one said you needed that $100,000 today. If you have 10 years, you need $10,000 today to be fully funded. And the fact that it's even being brought up as a question is part of the issue why we need a glitch bill, why we need these things clarified.
I think so too. And guys, there's enough questions specifically on those types of things. Of course, they're not going to affect your budget till 25, but we need some clarity. There's not really a whole bunch. We're kind of advocating for, we're going to learn a whole bunch more in March in terms of what's going on. And Steve, I promise to wake you up here in a second, talk about budgets, but the reality is there are so many questions which have huge implications, almost, get with your attorney, be aware, but also be aware that this thing is hopefully going to get clarified in March this year. The other thing I would say is, I think, the whole idea behind the legislation is life safety. And the whole idea is these are the types of things in milestone inspections, reserve funding are key things that will deal with the life safety issue. So if you're looking to get out of the requirement on technicality, like I'm 3.1 miles from the coast, I think you're taking the wrong strategy. I think the strategy should be, I really need to pay attention to the age of my building, the infrastructure of my building, and my ability to fund the repairs that are required. I think that's kind of the general sense of, that's the why behind the legislation. We're getting into technicalities. Ignore those. Do what's
Craig,
right.
That was super well said, and I applaud that. And I really want to piggyback and emphasize that, because don't mistake my frustration about how the bill came out and the need for glitches as in any way lessening the importance of the legislation, and for exactly the reasons you just said, Craig. So, and I'm hoping that everybody, yes, there's some sticker shock, there's some other things that are concerning, and we want to try to work and get all those fixed up. But generally speaking, Craig, I just want to applaud and what you just said, because that is important for everybody to keep in mind.
Well, Mike, in a humorous sort of way, we could almost refer to this glitch bill as a bitch bill to fix all the problems that are in it. While Craig is gone, why don't we just continue?
Well, let's keep going.
About here. Let's bring Steve into this and let's start talking about budgets while Craig.
And before we do, Nez, are you there?
Did we? Are we still?
Yes, I'm
Can you
here.
Can you post poll question 2, please?
Very good. I'm going to call you Craig Jr. for that.
It's that time of year again, guys. Let's see where everyone's in the budget process.
There we go. Have you started drafting your 2023 budget for your association? One choice, yes, no, and I don't know.
Steve, I'm not sure about you, but lots of questions have been coming in, certainly to the management companies from boards regarding 2023 budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's take a quick look at the poll. Oh, it's a live poll. Look at that.
Look at that. It's moving as we talk. If you haven't started yet, it really is time to start taking a look at the budget and start forecasting and planning.
And that's really the thing that I was going to talk about. It is that time. It is time to start early on those budgets. Exactly right. For all the reasons.
Take the floor, Steve.
So what everybody needs to remember is that these associations are not for-profit associations. Okay. And I get a lot of questions about, well, we're a nonprofit, and you're not a nonprofit. A nonprofit would be a church, a school, a 501c3 organization, something that's not taxable. What these associations are in Florida are not for-profit corporations. That means you work on a zero-based budget. Your income and your expenses equal each other. They must come out to zero. You're not allowed to budget for a profit.
What happens if you do come out with a profit at the end of the year, Steve? Let's say they have revenue because the condo leases its rooftop to a cell tower company, and they're getting $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year, and there's a surplus, if we will. Let's say that at the end of the year now, because of that, there's $50,000. Are they paying taxes even though they're not for profits?
Well, that's a good question. They are subject to tax. Not for profit, again, relates only to the fact that you're having a zero-based budget. So most of the time we can file what's called an 1120H, a homeowner association tax return, which allows us to exclude membership income and membership expenses and only tax you on the ancillary income. So that would be an example. Cell tower income would be taxable. We're allowed to offset that with certain allocable expenses, hopefully to bring the tax down to zero.
And Steve, before you go on, I just want to introduce our special guest, Craig Vaughn, who appears
Oh,
to be
yes. Hi, Craig.
but he's muted at the moment, I think. Craig.
Even better. No.
So you can work on that while Steve continues telling us about budgets.
The other thing about budgeting is that if you're an association and you're in the budgeting process, I'm noticing a bunch of people said, I don't know if they're in the budgeting process. What's important, I believe, is the communication with your unit owners. The board should be communicating with the unit owners on a regular basis. The budget process is starting, have some town halls, have some budget workshops. The thing you don't want to see happen is that unit owners are seeing the budget or hearing about it or this is my maintenance assessment for next year. And the first time they hear that is the mail out of the budget. You want to keep the communication lines open. And again, you need to make sure that your budget is adequate, especially in these inflationary times now. I would suggest not budgeting with last year's budget. Really contact your service providers, look at your contracts that are going to need to be renewed.
Steve, can we look at our expenditures and compare them to the line items that we budgeted for this year to make a better forecast for next year?
Absolutely. That is the proper way to budget. In fact, Craig, you're still muted. We can't hear you. The wrong way to budget would be to say, to target your maintenance assessment and then try to fill in your budget to fit that maintenance assessment. That would be the absolute wrong way to budget. I would not recommend anybody doing that, although I have seen that done. Many boards are sensitive to the fact that they don't want to be the board that raised everybody's assessment. So they try to keep it where it is.
Right. And then you can lead into sadly, tragically, a Champlain Tower situation as well because of that type of thinking.
That's exactly why that happened. Because they budgeted to the maintenance assessment, they waived the reserves, they knew they had structural issues and did not address them. And that's really the whole point of the new legislation also.
Okay. Now there's 10, now there's 10 of me. Can you put that up? Thanks, guys. Sorry about that. Boy, first time in 3 years we've had a problem with Zoom, so I do apologize. I was listening. You guys are right on, so I appreciate it. And Steve, I just wanted to comment on your last comment, which was, you know, the worst way to do a budget is decide what your maintenance fees are going to be and then plug your expenses in. You know, we advocate, and Steve, you mentioned it, for a zero-based budget every year. Start over. It's not an overly complicated process. You know, basically, you know, again, like I say, start at the beginning. There are very few items that are really that are discretionary from a board standpoint. So Steve, if I can jump on your comments, I think that, you know, number one, start with your existing contracts. And we, you know, what are you already contracted to do? Steve, you made a great point this morning when we were talking, you know, look at your contracts. They probably have escalation built into them. If they do, obviously build that escalation into the contract. And then if they're ending, that's when you need to get with your service provider early in the process, Steve, to your point, so that you can have a good look at or good feel for what they're going to increase. Is there a rate escalation in existing contract? I think staffing's another big one. Once you get kind of by these big fives, staffing's another big one. The market is the Florida minimum wage went up to $12, is going up to $12 next year. Are you at that level? We advocate for living wage, which is about $3 or $4 an hour more than that. So that's kind of what we look at. And then look for base salary increases. You're probably looking at 5 to 10% if you're in a good spot, depending on where you want to be. Where you want to be in the market. What's your starting point? Are you underpaying people now? Are you overpaying? Your management companies can help you. Your attorney can give you a good feel. Steve, you can help as well. Certainly your CPA can help you in that regard. So once you start with your contracts and you get through, staffing, the next big one is insurance. And the insurance, we're going to talk separately about insurance. I'm going to defer a little bit about insurance. The market's a mess. We have some ideas for you to help you with insurance. We got a ton of questions on insurance. The next big one is utilities, right? FPL is not planning any increase this year in rates, but there's a audit provision in there. So you want to probably look at your utilization, budget a couple of points more on your water and sewer and FPL. The next one really is look at your required repair and maintenance budget. How do you get those numbers? Those are really trend driven, right, Steve? You go back, you're going to look at the last couple of years. What are you spending on the routine nuts, bolts, and things for your community? And then lastly, do you have any special projects you want to work on? So there's kind of 5 components, and we find that the budget process follows the Pareto principle. I don't know if guys know what that is, but 80% of your budget can be done in 20% of the time. That last 20% is what takes 80% of the time. So keep in mind, these are budgets, these are estimates. They don't have to be perfect. So Steve, on top of your to-dos, did I miss anything? Is that kind of the process you recommend it gets followed?
That is absolutely the process. So, don't budget to the maintenance fee is the biggest thing, and review your contracts and the renewals that are coming up. And if you can renegotiate better pricing, shop it around. And that's for all your services, your lawn service, everything.
Yeah. We advocate for good value. Make sure you're getting good value for your cut. You can almost always get someone lower. Just make sure you think you're getting a fair price for what you're getting. Because if you're really looking to materially affect your budget, you're going to have to make decision on services, right? Are you going to cut your grass 36 times or 32 times? If you cut it 32 times, it'll be long in July and August, and everybody will ask you, why are we cutting the grass? Those are, that affects the service delivery, I would say. Steve, I want to jump into escalating costs because there's a lot of questions on escalating costs. But before we get there, Ness, can you post poll question number 3? I just want to, in your gut, listeners, what do you think the increase in your 2023 operating budget will be? And I think I can make a general comment, as I'm seeing no one saying less than 5%, which is probably good, that the days of 3% increases in your budget, days of being able to absorb the increases in costs are probably gone. So let's, I see the results coming in. Can we post these, Marinez? Like, these are very interesting numbers, guys. Less than 5%. Almost no one's expecting the budget to go up less than 5%, which is good. 5 to 10%, 30%, 10 to 15, 34, and over 15%. 28% of the people have a gut feel that that their budget will go up higher than that. So that leads to a couple of points. Number one, I want to talk about insurance. The market's a mess, as I've said. The legislators stepped in and put a Band-Aid on it that has had really no impact at this point in time. Maybe it'll have a longer term impact. But what I would say, I've talked to a couple of agents. We have a couple of go-tos in our world. And the reality is we're seeing rate hikes of 30 to 200%. So that's a big range. That's a lawyer range, right? In terms of what's reasonable, sometime between 0 and 500. Thank you very much for that guidance. But the reality is you need to you need to reach out to your agent. They know the market, they know your building. They can give you the best estimate. We're not even hazarding a guess at this point in time because it's too big. There's just too much variability in the market. So my recommendation is you reach out to your agent, you make them part of your team and get them to give you some guidance. And they're not going to be able to give you the actual number, obviously, right? The insurance renewal rates come out, if you're lucky, 30 days before your policy expires. But they know your building, they know where you are in the market. And I would reach out to them. The other thing I think we want you to be sensitive to with respect to insurance is it depends on where you are in the appraisal cycle. So Jeff, can you just give me an idea of the insurance or confirm for us the insurance requirements?
Sure.
Requirements in the statute?
Absolutely. I think what you're referring to is section 718.111, subsection 11, little a for the
That's exactly the one. That's exactly the one I was referring to.
Right? You need to have the insurance appraisal done every 3 years or updated every 3 years, as the case may be. That's in chapter 718 as to condominiums. It certainly does not exist in chapter 720 for homeowner associations, though, you'd be very wise to have insurance appraisals, have the insurance, your insurance agent and the insurance company do a walk around so you make sure you have the proper insurance at the right levels. And similarly and oddly, there is no equal counterpart in chapter 719 regulating cooperatives. But again, the same theory holds true. You definitely want to know the value of your assets so you can make sure you're properly insured.
It's a great point. And guys, I think it's really important for our listeners to know where they are in the appraisal cycle. Construction costs have escalated like everything else in the market. So you could be in a bad spot where you have a double whammy in that you're hit with rate increases and your insurable values are going up. So you have to increase the amount of insurance that you cover. So this is a big number, everybody, especially for condos. I think you're wise to reach out to your professional and get their guidance and coming up with that particular number. Okay, Steve, we've budgeted, and guys, we budgeted all the operating costs. We've got our contracts in our budget. We've got utilities. We've got now an idea of what our insurance is going to look like. So the last big one that we have to put in is reserves. So let's talk about reserves. Jeff, I want you to revisit for me, I think the requirement for reserves. But before we get there, Ness, can you post question number 4? It's a 2-part question. And keeping in mind, eventually you're going to have to do a reserve study, but right now you don't. So let's post poll question number 4. Does your association use a reserve study to estimate reserves? And does your association fully, partially fund reserves or waive them? Some questions, Jeff, came in, you get a reserve study and you're the board and you just don't think it's right. You think the estimates are too high and you want to challenge them. You don't want to put their estimate of fully funded reserves in your budget. You want to put your estimate. What do you think about that strategy?
Oh, I think that's a horrible strategy. If anything, you certainly don't want to substitute your own non-professional judgment for that of professionals. If anything, an association found itself, then I think the proper thing to do would be to hire another expert, do not share the initial report with them, get that second report, and then try to reconcile the two. And if in fact the numbers come out similar, well, you know what you're dealing with. If the numbers could come out even more money, who knows at the end of the day. But I certainly would not be putting myself on the hook. I want to say that substituting your own non-professional judgment for that of the professional is arguably a breach of fiduciary duty.
Oh, interesting.
I claim that somebody could ultimately make. I wouldn't want to be the board member doing that. That's for sure.
I think that's exactly right.
Something to add on that. I don't know, but
I think Michael, do you have anything?
If it results in monetary damages to the association, it's certainly something that someone might raise.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do, before we get Michael, I got a couple of questions for you, but before we get there, can you post the results, Marinez, of question number 4?
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys see those 61% of associations are basing their budget, their reserve estimates on reserve studies, which I think is a great thing. again, we're not all experts in how much it costs to replace a roof. You might as well pay somebody, and then if you're going to pay somebody, you might as well take their guidance.
Look at that bottom number.
What's that?
Look at that bottom question. That's improved a lot.
It has improved a lot. And I think, does your association fund reserves? 42% saying yes, 48 fully, 42 fully, 48 partially, 7% waiving reserves. So guys, this is actually great news for our industry, and for the commitment that you've made to having the money to do the repairs that are required. So that 8%, you're gonna have to get on top of that. And we have a couple at Castle, and we're getting with them to make sure they have a strategy to kind of move to fully funded reserves. But those are good numbers. But Michael, remind us now, please. If I'm a condo, I pass my budget. Talk to me about how I deal with reserves.
Right. Well, and just to remind everybody again, and this applies, by the way, across the board, whether you're 1 story, 2 story, or 3 stories or higher, you are adopting your budget with your reserves fully funded. And so you need to know what that number should be. And that's where the reserve study can come into play. But you should have more than just your best guesses at what that is. So you adopt the budget fully funded. That's what 718, 719 both provide. And if the board of directors believes, as the volunteers running this corporation, as Steve pointed out, they believe it's in the best interest of the community, of this association, of this business, that we fully fund, that's the end of it. They prepare the proposed budget, they mail it out, they have their budget meeting, they approve it, and they send out the payments. As I always say, legally, that is 100% within their discretion. Whether that's a political situation in your community is hopefully going to be less and less and less. But that is how it works. If, however, the board wants to extend to the membership the ability to less than fully fund, and that's while you can less than fully fund for those 3 stories or higher for the SERS requirements. But if you want to offer the less than fully funding or waiving options, that has to then be presented to the membership. My suggestion is you present that prior to your adopting the budget, so you know what budget you're adopting, but you present that vote to the membership, and currently it remains a majority of your quorum of the membership has to then approve that either waiving or partial funding. I can't encourage, HOAs do not have the same reserve requirement. We'll touch on that real quick in a second. But with regard to if you're a condo or co-op and you're talking about your budgeting and your reserves, your management's obviously going to give you guidance, your accountant's going to give you guidance, but you certainly should be reaching out to your association attorney to address the legal implications, because certainly your accountant and certainly your manager can express to you what I expressed to you, but they also are not giving you that as legal advice. They're giving you their knowledge base in the arena. So when you want to know from a legal perspective, what are our implications and how should we best handle this, then go to your attorney and get that confirmation.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Michael, can I add to that? I think it's important before you get into some of this stuff, but I think, guys, this is a very technical matter, waiving or partially funding reserves and that vote, and you don't want to miss it. So you don't want to do it yourself. You want to make sure you have your I's dotted and T's crossed on this one. So we don't get involved. That vote is something we really look to the attorney to guide us in terms of what the ballot looks like, what the notice looks like, all of those types of things.
And that, right. Thank you. Yeah, because that's the point too. There's specific language that needs to be on the document. You need to make sure it's in there, even in the right font, right size, font size.
And that's very important.
They can't figure out what 3 miles from the coast is, but they know what font we have to put the ballot in, just so I have this perspective.
Font size, not the necessarily. I don't know if the font type matters, but font size. And then just real quickly, HOAs, you don't have the same strict reserve requirements. Reserves in an HOA are going to be dependent on whether the membership is voted to, generally whether the membership is ever voted to approve reserves. So if you're an HOA and you have questions about reserves, absolutely reach out to your attorney, get confirmation whether, because you might have, quote, reserves that you've been collecting every year, which may not be statutory reserves, which really means that there is some discretion to use those funds for proper purposes under your governing documents in the statutes. But get with your attorneys and confirm, get a written opinion as to whether you have requirement for statutory reserves or not. And Steve will let you know in an HOA setting, if you don't have reserves, there's certain requirements that go in your financial reporting that I will defer to the CPAs for.
I just want to reiterate, contact your attorney. I can't tell you how many times I get a phone call or an email that says, Steve, can we legally do this or that? And I say, well, how do I know? I'm not an attorney. So absolutely contact the attorneys.
Hey guys, I want to talk on a topic. Thank you, Michael, for that clarification. There is some confusion in our market. You saw from the survey results, there are a number of associations that are anticipating an increase in their budget greater than 15%. So the budget is going to be more than 115% of last year's budget. There is some confusion in the landscape out there around, can a board increase their budget more than 15% from last year? Jeff, it's a bit of a nuance, but will you take us through, there are legal requirements on this and what can and can't happen?
It's only applicable, I believe we're going to be dealing in 718 condo land for the most part, but short story is if the board is going to exceed the budget by greater than 115%, which excludes your reserve calculations as well, if memory serves correctly, then if, and this is a big capital IF, if the board receives within 21 days after adoption of the budget, a written request for a special meeting from at least 10% of the voting interest, that means 10% of all the membership, then they have an opportunity to have a meeting to present a substitute budget, which has to take place within 60 days. So you know it will be on the 59th or the 60th day by that point. And then the substitute budget is only adopted if approved by a majority of all the voting interest. In other words, a slightly north of 50% of everybody, not a majority of a quorum, but of everybody. You guys know how hard it is to get people to vote in the first place on issues. While I have seen once in my entire career someone try to do this, they only got as far as the board, was obligated to schedule, if you will, that meeting for the presentation and consideration of the substitute budget. It's laughable when you think about how many people actually attended. I've just never successfully seen it played out.
Thanks, Jeff. We haven't either, Steve. I don't know about you, but I think
No, never.
we do hear some boards say, well, I can't increase more than 115% or more than 15%. And guys, you can't. That's the bottom line
Of course
here.
you can. It's a
You have to
complete
budget
fallacy.
the expenses that you need, right? That was the discussion we had yesterday.
What's coming up with inflation and these reserves, it probably will be more than 15%.
Right. Hey, Mike, have you ever seen it pass through? Have you ever, any of yours?
Same idea. We had in 20 plus years, we had one who proposed a budget and no one showed up at the meeting.
Yeah. So more of a miscommunication and some misinformation out there, but that is the case for everybody who's listening in. Steve, we a couple more minutes. I'm going to kind of do the lightning round for you. We have a couple of questions. So let's talk a little bit about surplus.
Right.
What do you advise your clients should be a reasonable amount of surplus to maintain?
Well, remember, we talked about zero-based budgets. So really, if you're ideally hitting your budget at the end of the year, there's no surplus, there's no deficit. We know that doesn't happen in the real world. So what I always advise that an association have between 1 and 3 months of operating cash on hand for any contingency or any emergency. So that's the sweet spot for us.
Yeah, we advocate for the same, Steve. I agree. And then what about using surplus to offset budget increases?
Well, when you do that, what you're actually doing is you're budgeting for a loss, which is okay. You've determined your total expenditures for the year, and that money has to come from somewhere. And it comes from maintenance assessments to the unit owners. But if you want to reduce the amount of assessment that you charge the unit owner, include some of the prior year surplus as revenue, you're not collecting it. It will never be counted as revenue. So if whatever that number is actually the loss or the deficit that you're budgeting for the year.
Right. So tread lightly, I think is kind of what we say. If you're going to do that, know that it's double-edged sword. You're going to help this year, but at some point you're going to run out of surplus to offset your budget.
That's exactly.
You're going to have to pay the piper at some point in time. I'm going to take the liberty of going over. I have one more question that I wanted to ask our audience, mostly because I was cut off. So I lost 2 minutes. That's how exact we are here at Castle in these webinars. Yes, will you post poll question number 5, please? How does your association fund year-end bonuses for site employees? We get this question a lot. And I would say, first of all, Michael, well, our listeners are asking that question. Is it okay for associations to budget year-end bonuses?
I think the safest approach is, if it's in the budget, it should be, obviously it has to be related to a contract. And it's probably, and it should be something, I guess the simplest way to say, if you have a contract with employee benefit, an amount that you have a line item for that, the board can consider increasing that dollar amount by a proposed number, and that gives some flexibility for the board to determine discretionary bonuses at some period of time. That would, if you're going to do it in the budget, that's probably the safest way. I will say, and Jeff may have something else to add, but I will say what I've seen come up far more often to avoid the association having to, or the board and management being attacked by this, is just having it be a voluntary thing that is not run through the association.
Right.
But
and
that's something you can talk to your attorney about more specifics. But to your specific question, if it's going to be something in the budget, I don't think it's a separate line item. I think it's part of the line item for your, our expenses, our employee expenses.
Yeah.
You also have to consider whether they're employees of the management company or employees of the association. If they're employees of the management company, and I've seen where the unit owners pull their money, run it through the association bank account, and then give these bonuses out. If you're doing that, the association, I believe, is really required to file 1099s for these people if you're giving them over $600, because that is the requirement. If they're employees of the association itself and you're doing this, then those amounts really need to be included in their W-2 forms that are issued by the association.
And remember too, condominiums are creatures of statute and can only spend money on those things authorized by statute or by contract. Where you have the contractual obligation in the declaration, the authorization for it, because the declaration is a contract. So if you're going to do bonuses, you absolutely, as Michael was alluding to, you want to make allowance for that to go back into the management agreement, that there may be discretionary bonuses provided, not exceeding, or some type of language to provide that basis. There's actually an arbitration case, I remember years back, when an association went too far with this issue because there wasn't that basis or that authorization for it in the first place. So it's always smart to have something to go back to say, yeah, we had the authority to do this.
Isn't it in the general authority to, you can spend the money you need to run the association? This is a normal part of personnel costs.
Yeah, it's not a normal part of personnel costs.
Yeah, Craig, that's too logical, Craig. Too logical.
Right.
But and looking at the results of the poll, by the way, I do see that
Let's
even though
post them, Marinez.
Split, the 40% don't address bonuses, residents can do it themselves, and 30% say they include it in a line item in the budget. So it's sort of split, but I do think that for me, I think that I've only seen issues come up with when they're included in the budget, or when the association is somehow trying to control it, people making allegations and accusations. And Steve brought in some excellent points as well, just on your tax implications. If you're doing it as a volunteer thing, even if you have owners organize it, but it's unrelated to the association, it's not an association committee.
Yeah. Well, I will say, guys, it is pretty normal in our business. I do see 40% don't address bonuses. If you're looking to compete in the marketplace for property managers, most have an expectation of some type of a performance bonus in their compensation pool. So anyway, guys, we're used all the time that I had allotted for this section. So I want to say, Steve, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate
Thanks for having me.
Time and expertise. Michael and Jeff, always a pleasure. And
Thank
to our listeners,
much.
thank you very much. Again, you can reach us at the email addresses here, but we appreciate you listening. As always, there's lots of interest in this topic, and we'll see you in a month or so. So great, guys. Have a great afternoon, and everybody, again, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well.
Nice of you to join.